Trudeau gives us a GST holiday break for 2 months. What does that mean? Is that going to affect interest rates? Will they go down? Many say it might not go down. We'll see all this and more with our good friend and mortgage broker, Mr. Dion Beg. Here we are, my friends, back with our favorite mortgage broker in all of the land, Mr. Dion Beg. How you doing, my man?
I'm great, man. I'm excited. Today, I think we're going to talk about taxes and politics. Exciting stuff.
It is. We should throw in religion there as well. All the things that perhaps you should never bring up into the Christmas holidays as we get closer to that. That's funny.
All right.
There was kind of a big surprise or I don't know what we call it yesterday in Canada with Trudeau announcing the Trudeau tax holiday with the eight.
Is that what they're calling it?
I always want to call it HST, but it's really GST. Pausing the GST for 2 months starting December 14th, I believe it is. And it's kind of...
It's tell me the details. Is it specifically only on groceries? Is that what we're talking about?
Well, groceries, kids' clothes, and some other items, kind of those
essential type stuff, right? It's not like new cars or anything like this.
No, I wish, or like new furniture or new big screen TVs, that sort of thing. I'm curious if we went that far, what that would do to boost. I don't know if that would boost the local economy, but it's kind of interesting, and there's kind of. People are still comprehending of what it means. It's basically been 24 hours now since that announcement. And as I'm reading through the different articles on that, all the provinces were taking this by, it was a big surprise to them.
Right. And I think we're within 12 months of an actual federal election. And this is like silly season when it comes to policies, right? It's just like whatever they've got in the back cabinet, that they sort of thought about years ago. They're kind of like grabbing in the back there and just throwing it out there and saying, let's run with this and see what happens, because everybody's looking to boost their popularity in a year where there's obviously an election happening. And, I'm sure you've seen them too. How many TikTok or Instagram videos have you seen in the last year where you get some Canadian person at home in their kitchen with their grocery haul, and they put it down and they've laid it all out on their kitchen counter, and they show the 7 things they bought, and they show the receipt. This was like $400 for these 7 things. Have you seen those?
Oh yeah. And every time we have family kind of all over the world, and I have family in the United States, and they still, every time they come back home, they cannot believe the pricing of our food and groceries and everything else compared to what they're paying. It's literally more than double, sometimes triple the cost of stuff.
Yep. And sure, the removal of some tax on that will help, but I think the cost base underlying it is still, like you said, it's quite elevated, maybe double what it would be in the States.
Yeah. And the energy, we always refer to, or at least, in Ontario, we refer to it as HST, but really it's not HST, it's the GST component that's being removed. And funny enough, not all provinces have HST, the harmonized, that's the key word, harmonized sales tax. Right. Of course, in I believe it's New Brunswick and Ontario, it's harmonized. So in Ontario, obviously, they're going to see a 13% reduction, which is, kind of significant. In BC, where I currently now live, it's just 5%. So it's entirely different. It's not the same across the board. So everyone's in their own little sandbox, if you will, right?
Yeah, up in arms saying it's not fair, I guess. But at the same time, we've been paying 13% on everything over in Ontario. So, I guess it's good to take a break when we can. But I know that there's been some news about how this may in turn impact this expected second jumbo rate drop in December, right?
Well, that's the interesting thing here. You got economists saying that, if the cost of goods come down slightly, it's going to obviously affect inflation. And that, of course, is the ripple effect, or one of the leading indicators of what they should do with the policy and the rates, right? So it shed some light on how that all intertwines and comes together.
Yeah, so the Bank of Canada sets their overnight rate based on what's going on with inflation. And as the last couple of rate drops have indicated, they've seen inflation and they haven't been happy with where inflation is at. So they've been dropping interest rates accordingly. Now, if inflation drops because this tax break is given for the holiday season, then it's logical to think that inflation during that time will be flat, and therefore there's less need or less perceived need for us to reduce interest rates in order to control inflation, because it's been controlled by this drop in the GST HST, um, on that side of things. So I can see that. The other thing that we should also mention is right now, Gary, we're in a period where we are inflation is measured year over year. So this year, November to last year, November. And we actually stopped increasing rates last year, July.
Hmm.
And so what's also happened is since last year, July, there's been zero increase in mortgage rates, which means shelter cost, which also makes up a big component of inflation. And so, because interest costs are actually coming down year over year, that would also mean lead me to believe that separate to the whole HST thing, we're also getting a big cut on that side. So, yeah, inflation may well and truly be below a number that incentivizes the Bank of Canada to drop rates deeply.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Of course, remind me, there's one more announcement in early December. Am I correct in saying
Yeah,
that?
you're testing me. I think it's the 4th or the 11th. I think it's the 4th.
Right,
But yeah,
right. And
within the
and
next couple of weeks, anyways,
yeah,
before the holidays.
the of course the true ripple effect, or we won't see how this affects the economy into January and February, in a sense, with the HST, or the GST holiday pause. So
Yes.
it's interesting. So I can see the bank not wanting to overstep what they need to do with that jumbo rate cut in early December, right?
Correct. They go off lagging indicators, which is
Yeah.
last month. So,
Hmm.
yeah, correct. You are correct that by the time they have to make this decision, there'll be no data on what's happened as a result of the removal of the GST. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Interesting stuff. And you brought to my attention, as we were kind of talking about this, the leader of the opposition party is throwing things out there as well, and some really good ideas. And let me share my screen here. As I do that, talk to us about what he's suggesting.
Sure. So you know that when you buy a new construction, there's always a tax component, be it depending where you are, GST, HST, but we'll just call it sales tax. When you buy a new construction, there's sales tax, and they're proposing here that for new homes under $1 million, that there be no provincial sales tax on that transaction, which means that for the consumer, depending on where they are, they'll save, let's call it 8% on their transaction costs, which is significant. So we might be, on an 800K purchase, they're mentioning, well, yeah, they're mentioning, sorry, 5%, which would be $40,000 on an $800,000 purchase, which is not a small amount of money. But of course, this is put forward by the Conservative Party leader. And not surprisingly, it hasn't been well received by people on the other side, who, especially some of the premiers who aren't of the same color as the opposition. So yeah, some of the premiers are like, oh no, we're not going to do this, because I can understand too. It's going to rob the province um, of their own funds, right? So this is a thing that I guess a lot of people are hoping will happen. He's saying that he's going to do it if he gets in, but I don't know how he'll do it without the agreement of the provinces.
Well, and it's interesting too, right? In two of the provinces, homes under $1 million, there wouldn't be a lot of them. BC, Ontario, that is, obviously, right? But in all of these other provinces where the median price is into the 500,000 to 750,000, it's a big component.
Yeah,
And you got,
so I agree. The thing is, the exception there would be condominiums, right? And
yeah.
we have a lot of condominiums in Ontario and in BC. So, the saving there would be evident. The other thing is, it will also, like, if you ask yourself, and you and I've spoken about in the past, why are these builders only building condos or mega houses, right? And that missing middle has been there for the longest time, and the reason that that's happened is it all comes down to this thing called incentive. And like, what is the incentive for anybody to take any action, including what is the incentive for a builder to build this product? So at this point here, with this potential suggestion of the removal of the sales tax, it would actually effectively make those properties say 5% cheaper, therefore maybe a more saleable and attractive property for a buyer, and therefore builders may say, well, if that's what is going to sell, then we will build to that price point. And so it might incentivize more construction of this type of property that is going to serve those first time home buyers in particular.
Yeah, that's a good point. It is interesting. Has each province, each area has its own median price, and I don't know if there's a mechanism where each province could have its own, properties under X will be, tax free for a period of time. I don't know if that's a doable thing other than a blanket statement of everything under a million type thing. But to your point, and we're seeing, I know I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but in Toronto, new home permits are down
Oh,
significantly.
yes.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm talking significantly. And if this is a way that we can increase that, I think this is something that perhaps, local governments need to look at.
Yeah. Anything that incentivizes supply to the point where we can build that 500,000 homes per year is a good thing.
That's right. That's right. So, speaking of new homes and wanting to sell homes, I know that you had mentioned to me off air that new home searches, or should I say, home searches on Realtor.ca and other sites have skyrocketed since a certain event in the states.
Yes. Exactly. So since Trump won the election, there's been a significant uptick in searches from United States residents for Canadian property. And so, what we interpret from this is, okay, there are people who are unhappy with the fact that there's going to be a change in administration, and they're exploring their options to potentially leave the United States and move to Canada. So, they're saying the traffic was up over 100%. Um, in the weeks that followed that election. How much of that will translate to actual action is kind of yet to be seen. But it's interesting how uh, I guess how emotional people feel about the events that happen down there, and it's almost like a sporting team down there more so than it is up here in Canada when it comes to politics. Like if your team doesn't win, then that's it. I'm out, and I'm going to leave the country. But yeah, maybe that's going to lead to more people moving here from the states. That's what that's sort of suggesting.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. We always have something going on, right? And it'll be interesting to see how that ties in. You're right. Of that 100% increase, it's maybe 5% of those people will actually do
Maybe,
something, or the Pareto's rule, right? But
maybe,
anyways,
maybe.
I always find stuff like that really, really intriguing, and it only time will tell to see how that plays out. Okay, I love when we get to like the practical piece of your business, my business in a sense, and we often coach clients on if you can keep your home while purchasing a new home for yourself. Let's have that open conversation. I know you've been coaching some of your clients with that conversation recently. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so just in the past week, I have a couple who we helped buy their condominium a couple of years ago. They're coming up to their 5 year mark, and in terms of renewal, and they're looking at options of moving to a larger property. So, um, in most cases, when people are in this scenario, what they'll do is they'll sell the first property, take the profit, and use that as a down payment on the next property. But we also show people the other option, which is to keep the existing property as a rental property and then buy the next property as their owner occupied property. And a couple of big questions come up at that point, which are, well, how do we get the down payment for the next property? And how are we going to prove to the bank that we can carry our first property and the second property? So I'll give you some sort of real life numbers based on this family that I'm helping right now. So right now they're in a property that's worth around $800,000 condominium, and they have a $300,000 mortgage. So if I just set aside commissions for a second, they're going to clear something like 500 grand if they were to sell the property. But I show them that they could in fact keep the property, and we could access about an additional 300 grand through a refinance on that first property. In doing so, their mortgage goes from 300 grand to 600,000, which is still underneath the 80% loan to value threshold. So we can access and put in their hands $300,000.
Mm.
And with that 300,000, they can use that as the down payment and closing costs on their next purchase, which they're looking at around 1.1 million. So while on paper all of this works, the question is then, how do we prove to the bank that we can carry all this new debt? And the reality is that even though we're raising the debt load on the first property, if we can prove that the rent that the rent that they're going to get from the condominium is going to cover that 600 grand, then that effectively neutralizes that property, meaning that that property doesn't drag on their debt load, and all they have to do is prove that they can carry the debt on the new property. And for this particular couple, their income is such that yes, we can demonstrate that. So they're quite excited because they thought they had to dispose of the first property, but they can keep it, and they're going to save a lot on that sort of transactional cost, which is also probably going to cost save them about 50 grand in transactional costs for from selling the property. So yeah, wherever possible. And one of the rules I learned very young in life from a financial planner that I was my mentor was the people who win in life are people who can hold assets for the longest period possible without the need to transact. And it kind of reminds me of sort of the Warren Buffetts of the world, where if you, I don't know if you've heard this stat, but they looked at all these people who held stock and looked at the wealthiest amongst them who held these stock trading accounts. And what they discovered is that the wealthiest amongst them were actually dead. And what I mean by that is they had bought assets and they didn't play with it, and they had actually literally passed away, but their accounts continued to exist. And because there was no trading activity, there was no transaction, they just held on to what they had and it just compounded and compounded. These guys were performing way better than
Mm.
all these other people who are doing managed funds and selling in and out. And this is why I think in almost every family, or everybody knows stories of people who are older and got really wealthy with real estate. And it's actually, in my opinion, it's because they held property and they just didn't sell. And they just held it for the longest period. And property is a little less liquid than mutual funds and other things. So it's a little bit more effort to sell. But if you can be one of those people, guys, who doesn't have to sell and can just keep holding this property and letting it compound decade after decade, then you can probably join those people who are millionaires in their retirement.
That's a great analogy. I love it. I'm thinking of some of my own portfolios, and we've had properties in this now coming up past 15 years.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's so true. We often think we need to tinker, right? Get
Yeah.
in and out. And maybe you have a similar story if you're listening and watching. And you might also think, John, I want to go back to um, that young couple that you're referring to, keeping
Mm.
that condo as an
Yeah.
option. And the cool thing there is when we have situations like that come up, it's like they're buying an investment property without buying an investment property,
Yeah.
right? It's and the cool thing is with stuff like this is they're buying it on, we'll call it yesterday's prices, not today's prices, which is
Exactly.
really, really key to this, to growing their portfolio, right?
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, as part of the conversation, they're like, oh, yeah, well, we'll get the new property and then we'll buy another investment property later on. And I'm like, well, you could, or you could just keep this one. And again, a lot of people aren't aware of the fact that they can. So not everybody can, but if you got to run your numbers and see if
Mhm.
the numbers work for you. But we've helped dozens of people do exactly what I've talked about here, and yeah, maintain ownership of, think about it. These guys next year, instead of owning just the one piece of real estate worth a million, they'll own that plus their existing property. Sorry, 1.1 million. They'll own that plus their existing property worth 800. They'll have 1.9 million dollars exposure to the GTA property market. And if you were to fast forward, 20 years, who's the wealthier version? It's the person who started with 1.9 million in the year 2025 versus the person who started with only 1.1 million in the year 2025.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. That's a great point. It's a really great point. And it just provides so many more different opportunities. And the cool thing there is we are not tax accountants by any means, but their tax exposure to the property or the condo that they get to keep will be based on today's value moving up. So there's what they've been able to appreciate while living in it for their primary residence for the last 5 years. That portion will be tax free. It's everything above that might be applicable to your capital gains tax. But talk to your tax accountant about that.
You got
But
it.
that's those are some of the neat aspects of what
Yes.
this could look like as well for them. So I'm excited for them. I like hearing those types of stories. That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah, and we've got literally dozens of our clients have done exactly this. And yeah, if you're thinking of selling, I would say first explore that choice of keeping it and see if the numbers work for you.
Excellent, my friend, as always. Remind us how to get a hold of you.
Yeah, kangamortgage.ca or the Dion Beg on Instagram.
That's Dion Beg. I'm Gary McGowan, and we'll see everybody in the next episode. Goodbye for now.